And I have the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide. That was like that big one of the big documents I sent you, where it has like all of the symbols for the VFR sectional chart. So this is a book copy. I'm just gonna put it up here. Here's a VFR sectional chart, a paper version. Fun fact, these expire every 56 days. So before you had like apps like ForeFlight, you'd have to buy a new one every 56 days for it to be up to date. Because there's like changes with terrain and obstacles. Like sometimes the obstacle that was like a tower, like a cell phone tower, maybe they got rid of it. Maybe it's higher now, so they update it. Also, you'd have to buy a new sectional chart for a certain area. So this is the San Francisco sectional chart. It only goes down as far, I don't think it quite reaches Fresno. So if you want to go, oh wait, this is the terminal. I'll get a different one. I think it goes down maybe as far as Fresno or right before Fresno. So if you wanted to go to Fresno or anywhere down south, you'd have to buy the Los Angeles sectional chart as well. So that's how you used to have to do it. Thank God we don't have to do that anymore. These are all expired, but this is just for training purposes. So that's what we're going to do. And I'll kind of help you guys out to get you started on here. Oh my gosh, of course this is not the same. That's Los Angeles. Okay, well you can still use the link. We'll just do that. Alright, and then for the videos, I will be out of town, out of the country, September 30th. So I will get today's video and last week's video up. In Italy. That's so fun. Been there once before, like back in like, I don't know, 2018. But I went to Rome with my family, and so this time I'm going to Florence. We figured out when we were there, we were like, we don't need to do Rome more than like a day. It's very touristy, which obviously I'm a tourist, so it's fine. Okay, so we're gonna get started. I have all of the questions up here, so if I ask it to you and you forget, it's just gonna be up here. All right, so actually before I go into it, I'm basically gonna walk you through a scenario where you're pre-flighting. You have a flight planned with your friend who's not a pilot, so they're just a non-pilot passenger. You're a private pilot now. So that is the mindset I want you to be in, and that's where the situation is going to kind of take place. So, okay, so now you're preparing for a flight tomorrow. It's your first time going to Monterey without your CFI. You're a private pilot now, and you're taking a non-pilot friend. They've never been in a small airplane before. So the question is, how would you assess the risks associated with this flight, and what considerations would you take into account during your risk assessment, during your pre-flight planning, when you're regarding your destination and your route? You're going from McClellan to Monterey. And you don't have to answer me right now. You can discuss, you can think about it, you can review your notes. I'm specifically asking about risk assessment. Talk about risk assessment essentially every lesson, and probably will continue to talk about it every lesson. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of information to consider.
So it's the first time without the CFI, so basically flying by yourself the first time?
It's your first time going to Monterey without your CFI.
Okay.
So let's just pretend you're a private pilot now. Last time you went to Monterey was as a student pilot with a CFI. Now it's just you and your non-pilot passenger. mess with each other. Hello. That's okay. We're just doing a review of the first 3 lessons. So I'm pretty much asking kind of like check ride questions.
Okay.
Yeah, based off of the previous lessons. And McKenna, you're like the closest one here to your check ride, so
Yeah.
you can help guide.
Okay.
Yes.
Could it have to do with like the pressure altitude and like seeing like the like I don't know, like calculating it to make sure your plane is like where it should be in the sky?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're asking, what are the risks? So you're flying to Monterey as a private pilot for the first time, so no CFI, and you're taking a non-pilot friend. And I'm asking, what are the risks associated with this? What factors would you consider when you're planning the flight? What are some considerations you would have for your destination and your route? Yes.
Like the pave.
Absolutely, yes. PAVE. What is PAVE? Yeah. PAVE is a big, like, part of the answer.
It's like the checklist for navigating.
Correct. Yeah, what does PAVE stand for? Yeah, you got pilot. So let's just pause there. So pilot. Okay, so what do you mean by pilot? How do you risk assess yourself as a pilot? Yes.
Like seeing if you feel good, like if you feel comfortable, getting any bad vibes.
Yep. Is there another risk assessment checklist you can kind of go through under pilot?
The eyes.
I'm safe. Okay, what's I'm safe? Illness. Yeah, are you sick? How are you feeling? Medication, if you're on any new medication, as long as it's FAA approved, what's the recommended wait period to make sure it's okay?
5 times, right? for medication?
There's 5 times the half-life to get it out of your system. If you're on a new allergy medication, how long should you give yourself at least to make sure you don't get like drowsy or headaches or
If it's a new medication, isn't it like 48 hours?
48 hours. Should wait for at least 48 hours. See how you do with it. All right, so you got illness, got medication. I'm safe. What's the S? Yeah.
Stress, and then alcohol,
Yep.
fatigue, and then eating and emotions.
Correct. So let's kind of go through those. So stress. How do you guys have any specific way that you can determine for yourselves if you're feeling stressed? Like, you know, maybe you're irritable or something like that. Give me an example. How do you know when you're stressed out?
I have no motivation.
No motivation, for sure. A lack of motivation can really contribute to an unsafe flight because maybe you're not motivated to go the extra mile on certain things, to double check certain things, or even to make the flight in general. If there's an issue that arises, you're not motivated to solve that issue.
Is this where you do the 3-strike rule?
This is what I do. Yes, I do the 3-strike rule for myself. It's not like an official thing, but that's my example. Is like if I forget my car keys on the way to the car, I forgot to change from my slippers to my tennis shoes. It's happened, and I've gotten in the car and I've gotten on the freeway and I'm like in slippers and I'm like, well, I can't fly a plane in slippers. I mean, I'm sure you could, but you probably shouldn't. You know, did I forget anything else back at home? Okay, 3 strikes. I'm obviously not mentally there enough to fly. What's one more? What's another indicator? This is completely objective, or I'm sorry, subjective. No motivation, 3-strike rule.
Just making sure the environment is safe.
Yeah, so that's the E for, I'm sorry, that's actually the V. That's the V for PAVE. I was just asking what are some indications that you personally have that tell you that you're stressed. Because remember, self-awareness is key when we're on the ground and determining if we're fit to fly.
For me, I feel like when I'm stressed, I just feel like anxious. Like my guts like don't like do something.
Okay,
And I'm like I
there
don't
you
know
go.
why I feel like that, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. You get a little anxious for certain things, and if you're anxious, that is going to definitely interfere with your ability to just pre-flight, to fly, to make decisions, and anything that you were already kind of normally anxious about, like let's say talking to ATC, maybe you're still kind of anxious about that. Now that's just like 5 times more. Okay, so we talked about the stress, so we're still on I'm safe. So alcohol, how long do you guys have to wait from drinking?
Is it 8 hours?
It is 8 hours. 8 hours between drinking and what? I'm going to recommend looking in the bar aim for this. I'm going to put it up here. If you have it online, you can also check out that. I will give you a little bit of a hint. Here's pretty much the table of content for part 91, which is the rules that we're operating under. There's literally a section called alcohol and drugs. Yeah, you can take that. It's not 8 hours bottle to throttle, I'll tell you that. That's the phrase you're going to hear a lot. It's going to be like... This is a good page to tap. I was reading that upside down. It is 91, right? Okay, good. Alcohol and drugs.
17.
91-17.
Am I crazy? Is this working?
91-17.
Yeah, like, is that?
No, so it's actually like very close to the beginning.
Oh.
Keep going. So there's some layers. Yeah. And there you go. Once you find it, you can just read it out loud.
I have it written down.
Sure.
9117.
Yes. 91-17. So what's that say?
You can't have a 0.04 more than 0.
Mm-hmm. Can't have blood alcohol content of more than 0.04. And it's 8 hours between drinking and what? You're gonna hear 8 hours bottom to throttle, and I want to like eradicate that from your brain because it's not accurate.
I can't find it, but I know it's like when you start like planning things out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like before you even get to the aircraft.
Correct. It's when you start performing required crew member duties. You're the pilot. You're a required crew member. So between drinking and pre-flighting, drinking and assessing the weather, drinking and flight planning. That's the 8 hour window. And also the blood alcohol content of 0.04. So even if it's been 9 hours, if you have a blood alcohol content of 0.05, still can't go. Okay, so that's alcohol and drugs. I'm safe. So F is fatigue. That's, there's different kinds of fatigue. The one that we're really concerned about is chronic fatigue. So that's not, I forget what the less serious one is, but it's just like normal fatigue, you just didn't get enough sleep that night. Chronic fatigue is something that takes more than just a good night's sleep to get rid of. It's something that has happened over time and something that's built up. So chronic fatigue requires, depending on how chronically fatigued you are, if you had like a month of just bad sleep, it might take you an entire month to fully recover. So you want to consider, am I fatigued? Am I chronically fatigued? Should I not be flying for the next week so I can catch up on sleep, or I can catch up just like on having some downtime, self-care, things like that. Okay, and then eating and emotion. I put those two together because if you don't eat, you get hangry. Okay, cool. You went through I'm safe. So what's the A in paved? Now we're back to paved. Aircraft. What about the airplane? How are you risk assessing the airplane, and you specifically with the airplane? I'll give you guys kind of a hint. Parker mentioned like pressure, altitude, density, altitude. That's a limitation of the plane. Can this plane make the flight?
The NW craft,
That is a requirement. I would say NW craft is more of its own separate thing.
Okay.
But yes, that is definitely a requirement. We will talk about it. Anything else on aircraft?
It's like overall airworthiness.
Yeah, overall airworthiness. What's airworthiness? What's that mean? It was our first lesson.
It's like legally, it's like okay to fly, I guess. Like it has
Pretty
like
much.
maintenance
Yep.
that it's required to have all done, and it has the required controls and everything too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Top stickers, like all that.
Yes, absolutely good. Yes, airworthiness has the inop stickers if something's inoperative. It's had the required maintenance done. General wear and tear has been taken care of, and it's operated within its limits. So we're not doing barrel rolls in the 150. Making sure it's airworthy. Bonus question: who is responsible for determining if the plane's airworthy? You would think, but no.
AMP?
Mm-mm.
Maybe? No, that's different.
This is definitely more of a written test question. You could be asked it on your checklist too, but you'll probably do this on the written. And it stumps everybody. You can Google it. I'm open to you guys using Google. Part of the conditioning of like these mock orals is for you to know where to look for information and how to find information, especially if you're like nervous. I hope you're not nervous. We're doing this for fun, you know?
Stressing me out.
I know it's a little, but this is good. You know, we're trying to kind of mimic those check ride nerves a little bit. So who is responsible for the airworthiness of the plane?
Is it the FAA?
No. They're the ones that issue, I guess? the
Yeah.
airworthiness?
Yeah. The owner of the plane?
Mm-hmm. Owner operator.
Okay.
Girls of the Fly is responsible for maintaining its airworthiness status. We're responsible for making sure it has the 100-hour done and it has the annual done and all of the other required maintenance. However, I like to add on to the statement. Yes, it's the owner operator's responsibility, but you're the one going out to fly that day, and you're the one putting your life at risk that day. So if you determine for any reason that it's actually not airworthy or you just have bad vibes, then you don't go. And it is your responsibility as the pilot to do your due diligence in making sure that this plane has been taken care of. If you're going to go rent an aircraft from a flight school for the first time, I'd recommend asking to see their maintenance logs for that specific aircraft before you go. If they don't want to give it to you, that's sketchy. I would not fly that plane if they don't let me see the maintenance logs. That actually happened to a flight school. I was out of McClellan, I won't say who, but they have been disbanded because they were doing illegal maintenance on their planes and also not tracking it. It does catch up and they do get found out eventually, thankfully, but there are some sketchy flight schools out there, as you will come to find, which is unfortunate. You would think, there's a little bit more regulation with that, but anyway. Airworthiness is a good topic to bring up and to discuss. So still on A for PAVE, aircraft, make sure it's airworthy. Make sure it can it has the required performance for the requirements of the flight. Anything else? I'm trying to get you guys to kind of talk about something that's regarding both you and the plane together.
Documents?
Like what documents?
Like the radio license and stuff like that.
Yeah, what are the documents? What's the acronym? Do you remember?
Arrow.
Arrow. What's the Arrow acronym?
Airworthiness, registration, operating manual,
Correct. Yes, and if you're international, radio operator's certificate as well, or radio operating license. You have to have one, and the plane has to have one. If you're flying international. So some people do flights to Mexico. There's a whole process for that. I won't get into. But yeah, you have to make sure the required documents are on board. Sometimes people take the POH home on accident because they're like, I'm going to study the POH. That was the only POH in the plane. Can't go. It seems silly because I can't go. The plane's perfectly good, but I don't have a book. Yeah, can't go, unfortunately. Making sure it has Arrow. And then still one other thing that I'm kind of like, there's you and the plane. There's something I want you all to put together for determining, like, can I fly this plane? Because most of you are going to be doing, if you're with Girls with Fly, you're probably going to be in the Cessna 150. But eventually you're probably gonna go out and, spread your wings, literally, and go rent from other flight schools. They might not have a 150, but they do have 172s, which is pretty much just a little bit bigger than 150. Has 4 seats, more horsepower.
Proficiency?
Yes, proficiency. How familiar are you with the plane that you're flying? If you're gonna go check out a 172 and you have like 5 hours in it, are you really comfortable taking up a non-pilot passenger all the way to Monterey for the first time by yourself? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Depends on the day. Depends on who you are. Depends on how many hours you have. Totally depends on the person. That's why we talk about proficiency. Proficiency is how comfortable you are in the plane. And it's subjective. It depends on the person. There's currency as well. And what do you need to maintain your currency as a private pilot?
The 3 takeoffs and landings in the preceding 90 days.
Correct. Three takeoffs and landings every 90 days. And that's just for, you could do your takeoffs and landings on 150 and then go fly 172 and still be legal, because it's still an aircraft single engine land. That's fine. That's the bare minimum. We're talking about proficiency, which is up to you. You might want more than 3 takeoffs and landings every 90 days because you're brand new pilots. So are you proficient with the plane? Are you familiar with its performance? Are you comfortable handling this plane on your own? And also, are you comfortable handling this plane on your own with somebody who's probably got questions because they're non-pilots? So you're kind of managing that stressor of having someone who's probably going to be a little nervous. They've never been in a small plane before. So making sure that you're proficient with the aircraft. And it could be the aircraft type. It could also just be the avionics. Maybe you're flying a Cessna 150 still, but maybe it has like all these new avionics that you're not used to. It has like a GPS that you've never used before. It has different things on the panel that you've never seen or never used, because the 150 that you fly doesn't have that. Are you still comfortable flying it? Yes, it's the same kind of plane, but managing avionics and the buttonology of GPSs can be different. They don't always translate across. So if you're stressed out figuring out which button to press while you're flying, that could stack up against you very quickly. Okay, now we're still on PAVE, but now we've moved on to the V. What does the V stand for? Environment. What are we talking about when it comes to environment? Yes.
Whether if it's day or night, like, can the plane handle it, like that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. So if it's day or night, what's our concern for night flying? What are some concerns? There could be multiple. You're taking a passenger at night. What do you need?
The 3 takeoffs and landings, but to a full stop.
Correct. 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop every 90 days at night. There's different definitions of night. So when do those landings count?
Was it just the landings or the takeoffs too?
Takeoffs and landings. Every 90 days to a full stop at night. But again, there's a certain definition of night that we're talking about.
An hour after sunset and an hour before sunrise?
Correct. 1 hour after sunset, 1 hour before sunrise. That's when you can log those landings for currency carrying passengers. If it's sunset to sunrise, they don't count. There's like 3 different definitions of nighttime. We won't get into it. That's the answer for that one.
It's 1 hour before sunset or 1 hour after?
1 hour after sunset, 1 hour before sunrise.
Okay.
3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop, so no touch and goes.
Is this just like help you like know that you're like practicing that you're better before you take passengers up? Is that, okay.
Yeah, if you're going up doing a night flight by yourself, the currency's for carrying passengers. So if you're not current, you can go get current on your own, but you can't be like, hey mom, let me go get some night currency, come with me. You can't do that. And it's because the risk is higher. Now you have another person with you. And night landings are very different, as you will find out. I recommend, if you can, if your CFI is comfortable, going to like a well-lit runway like Lincoln or McClellan and landing without the landing light. If you're comfortable, obviously, don't do it like on your own. Okay, so day or night, weather, terrain, for sure, those are all part of the environment. Okay, what's E out of PAVE?
External pressures.
External pressures. What's an external pressure that you can think of in this situation?
If you have to be somewhere at a certain time and like you're stressed and like you just don't know if you're gonna make it.
Absolutely. Get there-itis is a real thing. You're carrying a non-pilot passenger. You've been planning this flight for months, let's say. You were still a student pilot when you were planning this flight, and your friend's been waiting and then looking forward to this. This is awesome. You really want to make it happen. That might push you to do things that you normally wouldn't. That's why you go through PAVE. That's why you go through I'm safe. That's why you go through your proficiency versus currency. That's why I'm asking you, like, what are your indications that you're stressed or anxious? Because you need to be self-aware. And here's the thing, when you're a private pilot, that does not mean your CFI is no longer a resource. I have private pilots from 2 years ago that still contact me regarding like decisions that they're trying to make. Use your resources, talk it out with someone, or it doesn't have to be CFI. It could be with another pilot that you just met at the FBO and you're like, hey, here's the situation. What should I do? I'm really caught up in this, web of decision making. Have someone there to talk you down. Because sometimes you really do need that like objective third party point of view to be like, no, don't go. Why would you do that? Don't talk to like the old World War II pilot or whatever, because they're gonna be like, go! You know what? So maybe not them, but maybe like someone who's a little bit more responsible. Talk to your CFI. They're still gonna be available to you. Send them a text, give them a call, and be like, hey, I'm planning this flight, and I'm just not feeling great about it. And they could say, you know what? I had a similar situation. Da 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 da. Here's what I did, and that might help you make a good decision. It's still ultimately your decision, but yeah, when you're a new private pilot, sometimes you still need a little bit of guidance, and that's totally fine. Okay. We've assessed the risks. Ramp checks, everyone's worst nightmare. So you're in the middle of pre-flighting the Cessna 150 for some solo pattern work during the day when this person approaches you. They introduce themselves as an FAA safety inspector, and they are saying, this is a ramp check. Can I see your documents? What are you required to show them?
Your logbook?
You are a student pilot again. Yes.
Your logbook with the endorsement.
Correct. What other documents?
Your ID or something
Yes,
like that?
government issued ID. What's a government issued ID? What counts?
Driver's license.
Driver's license. Yeah, or a passport. Okay, so you have your government issued ID, you have your logbook with your solo endorsement. What else do you need?
Student pilot certificate.
Student pilot certificate. One more.
The medical certificate.
Your medical certificate. What is the bare minimum medical certificate that you need as a student pilot?
Is it just a general one or no?
You could. I believe, yes, you could with the general one. I think what you're talking about, yes.
Basic med?
Yeah, you could do basic med. What's another one that most of you probably have or will be getting?
Third class?
Third class, yes. What documents about the plane do you have to show them?
Registration.
Going back to Aero. Yep. Okay, pass the ramp check.
Is that all they do? They just like ask you for your documents?
Yeah, because they're rare, but part of it is like, hey, no one's ever questioned me. Like, oh darn, I forgot my driver's license. But you know what? No one's ever gonna question me until they do. So it's kind of like the FAA is just like kind of always over your shoulder a little bit. Whether or not you've actually ever been ramp checked, that possibility is always in your mind. So that's kind of like the motivator to be like, don't forget your documents, because the one time you do, that's when it happens.
What would happen if like you didn't have your documents and they did a ramp check?
And it looks like you're going to go fly. They could suspend your certificate. They could revoke it. Depends on what mood they're in that day. Could just be a slap on the wrist and they give you some remedial training. But if it looks really bad if you know that you're missing something and you still want to go and you still intend to go fly anyway, because it's like now you're intentionally breaking the law. So it's probably a suspension or revoking your certificate kind of situation. Oh, I just realized we have an impact for you. Somebody put that there. Okay, you arrived at the airport. Now you're private pilot again. to pre-flight the plane, and you see that one of the tires is flat, but you happen to be now with another pilot who owns her own plane, and she knows how to do a lot of her own maintenance. So she's like, hey, I know how to change a tire, I can do that. Is that legal? It is legal, correct. What does she have to do? So she changes the tire. What's that?
Document.
Where?
Maintenance logs.
In the maintenance logs. There's airframe, engine, propeller. Where's this entry going in? Airframe. Changing the tire, put in the airframe log. Needs to write down what she did, the date, the tack time on the plane, her name and her certificate, her pilot certificate. If she happens to be an A&P, like an aircraft mechanic, then obviously she would use her A&P certification. But if she's just a pilot, it's just your name, the date you did it, and your certificate number, all the details, the tack time, tail number. All right, you continue pre-flight, and you notice that the right wing position light is not working. The left wing light is on and just fine. Can you still fly with one of your position lights inoperative? I don't know.
Does it depend if it's day or night?
I don't know. Position light is inoperative. Where do you think you could find this answer? There's
No,
Google.
you cannot.
There's always Google. What regulation? I will say it's one of those. You should probably look at both of those, actually. Just to reiterate, there's 91.205, there's 91.213. Okay, what's that? What's it say? So 91213, I believe, is referring to inoperative equipment and how to maintain airworthiness flying with inoperative equipment.
Oh, is it the 8-minute flames and flaps? So you can fly with it during the day, but you can't fly with it at night.
Correct. So 91205 talks about the 8 tomato flames. So you got VFR daytime operations, the equipment required, aka 8 tomato flames. And then you have VFR nighttime requirements, which is 8 tomato flames plus flaps is the acronym. And position lights is part of flaps, but it is not part of 8 tomato flames. So VFR daytime is fine, nighttime is not. And the definition for nighttime for position lights is what? When do you need your position lights? Nighttime, yes, but like what time? There's a certain time.
Sunset to sunrise?
Correct. Sunset to sunrise, you need those position lights on. What's 91213 say about flying with inoperative equipment? What do you have to do? So, okay, you determined, yes, I can fly, this is legal, but you have to do something with that light.
Like a sticker on it saying it's maintenance.
Correct. What's the sticker have to say?
Like the pilot, like your number or
Is it the in-off sticker?
Correct.
Yeah.
Gotta placard it in up. What else?
Unplug it or the circuit breaker or whatever.
Correct. Disconnect it. You'd also remove it, but then you'd have to get a new weight and balance done. So we're not gonna do that. If you knew how to change it, could you do that yourself?
Yeah, can't you? Cause like the flat tire, like you can change the flat tire, but it's just like different because it's like electrical. Or,
I don't know.
No, you can't.
what I will say is, to be honest, everybody guesses a little bit during their check ride on the oral. We all just do it. But if you're going to guess, say it confidently. If you're gonna say, yes, you can fly with it, say yes. Don't elaborate, just say yes. And then they're like, okay. They might say, hey, but if there's a little bit of like a fluctuation, like yes, they might be like, are you sure? That's why I'm saying, I don't know.
Yes, I think you're able to do maintenance, but should you, depends on what you know.
I agree. I think yes.
Okay, you think yes. Are
I
you
know
sure?
yes.
Okay. You are correct. Yes, you can.
But like you shouldn't if you don't know how to do it.
If you don't know how to do it, then don't do it. Yeah, for sure. Like, I would not do that. Yes, I can, but really? No, I can't.
So you can also change the lights.
Mm-hmm.
Can you fix anything if like you know how to do it? So just like certain things.
Certain things. There's like a definition. It's like you can't do major altercations to the plane, and I feel like that's the phrase that they use. But there's things that like go under that. So like I'm trying to think, what could you absolutely just not do? You obviously can't conduct your own 100-hour or your own annual. There's owner-assisted annuals, which kind of just means it is what it sounds like. You take the plane to an aircraft mechanic with an IA, so an inspection authorization. You could do certain things, like you could change the oil yourself. You could remove all of the inspection panels, so unscrew all of them, take out the seats, take out the carpet, because that saves them a lot of time. So people do owner-assisted annuals to save money, because an annual, even for a 150 or like a 172, it could be like $5-6 grand around there for the year. So if you end up owning an airplane, just know it's very expensive to own a plane. It might not be as expensive as you would think to buy it, but to maintain it is where the money comes in. So you could do owner-assisted annuals and do things like, what do they call it? They call it opening. So you open the inspection panels, take out the seats, the carpet, all of that, to save time for the mechanic. You do your own oil change. You could air your own tires, you can replace tires, you could clean out your spark plugs, you could do stuff like that. But I would say like, if they have to get into the panel and like rewire something or like install a GPS or something because you want to update your avionics, you can't do that. That's considered a major alteration. Did I say altercation in the beginning? If I did, I'm sorry, it's not the word. Alteration, yes.
For the 100-hour, is that like from like flight schools and like stuff like that? Because they just gotta keep it.
Correct.
And then the annual is just like if you own your own plane.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Annual is for everybody, flight schools and aircraft owners.
Okay.
Every plane needs an annual. 100 hours specific for flying planes for hire, aka like a flight school. So if you're just the owner of your plane, you don't have to do the 100-hour, but you do have to get an annual. Flight schools, we have to do both. And they're pretty much the same inspection. So we pretty much get an annual done every 100 hours. The difference is who can perform it and sign it off. So AMP can do a 100-hour, AMP with an IA can do an annual. So inspection authorization is IA. So 91-205 and 91-213. Yes, we went through it all. Okay. We already kind of talked about this, so I'm gonna skip it. Do you have any questions on that one? Who's responsible for airworthiness?
The pilot.
The owner. Yeah, owner operator. It is your responsibility as a pilot to double check everything though. All right, you're back flying with your non-pilot friend for the first time. They've never been in a small plane before. You're very excited to take them to Monterey. What are some items you brief them on? How do you brief them to how to behave on this flight?
Making sure they're not putting their feet on rudders.
Yeah, absolutely.
The safety.
Yes, the safety briefing. What's the safety briefing?
Seat belts.
Mm-hmm.
And making your seat backs are locked.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The air vents.
Uh-huh. The air vents. So you have S, you have A, what's F? Safety briefing.
Fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or any other emergency equipment that's available on board. About the E.
Make
exits.
Mhm.
Emergency
Yep.
exits.
How to open the door. You'd be surprised how many people cannot figure out how to open the door. Also, to make sure you close the door, because they, it's a plane. They want to be very gentle. They're new. They don't want to break anything. They gently try to close the door. As you know, you gotta slam that sucker to get it to close, and if you don't, it will open on takeoff. So
You have to be able to have a solo on.
So there you go. You gotta
Great.
slam those things,
Yeah.
like especially Cessna doors. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So exit, evacuation plan. What's T?
Talking.
Mhm.
Sterile cockpit.
Sterile cockpit. Sit down, shut up, don't touch anything.
And also traffic.
Yeah, and traffic. Involve them. Include them on the flight. Give them a responsibility. Depending on how much you trust them, obviously, That's why.
Isn't it like a question?
Yeah, ask them. Do you have any questions? No, they might be like, what's that? And be like, don't worry, it doesn't matter. Don't touch it. Yeah, give them a little safety briefing. Something I like to include is don't put your feet on the rudder pedals. If you feel motion sickness, do not keep it a secret. Because most people do for some reason, because like they're embarrassed. I'm like, no, if you're sick, you need to tell me immediately so I can help you. Because the last thing you want is for them to just like throw up out of nowhere, and then it's a whole situation. If they need to use the restroom, please let me know. If like there's any physiological needs that arise, you need to let me know, and I will take that into account for planning. Like if we need to make a pit stop somewhere or whatever it is, let them know. Like, hey, don't keep that a secret. There's no secrets here. The reality is you're trusting me with your life today, so we're establishing this very deep level of trust right away. I'm also trusting you to not do something stupid. And doesn't matter how long you've known the person or if they're your family member, that does need to you kind of need to get through to people sometimes and explain to them, like, this is serious. And your life's at risk, my life's at risk. Not to scare you, but that's just how it is. So I have a student how she explains it. So she is I don't know, like not a professional shooter, but like she shoots for sport. Like she competes in shooting competitions. And the way she described it, which I thought was super unique, and she was like, if I wouldn't trust this person with a gun, I would not take them in a plane. And I was like, oh, interesting. I don't know much about guns. So, but I just think that is an interesting point and something that's very thought-provoking. So do with that what you will. Okay, you're now conducting your run-up check, and you're preparing to take off out of McClellan, and you're going to start your journey. You're performing the magneto check and the carb heat test. What indications are you looking for? How do you conduct mag checks? What do you do?
Doesn't it have to do with the RPM?
Mm-hmm. Should be in one of those pink sheets. Just as a hint.
We look for a drop in the RPM
Yep. For which one?
when checking the max.
Mm-hmm. Check the mags. So most of the time you're operating on what, McKenna?
On both.
On both. You're most of the time operating on both. You should be operating on both magnetos, because you have two. When you do the mag check, you check, people do it in different order. I go to the right mag first, I go back to both, back to the left mag, back to both. Each time you go from right or to the left, you're looking for a drop in RPM. Because what are you doing? If you're checking the right mag, what did you just do to the left mag?
Turn it off.
Yeah, you grounded it. So you're on the right mag, you grounded the left mag. You're on the left mag, you grounded the right mag. You're making sure that they ground properly. If they don't ground properly, that's an indication that you're having a magneto issue. And if you only have one good operating magneto, there goes your redundancy. You could operate on one, you could do it, but now you don't have the redundancy of having two. So if something were to happen, your chances of an engine failure just went up. So why take the risk? What about the carb heat test? How do you know it's working?
A jump in RPMs.
Not a jump.
Should they drop too?
Should also drop. There's a drop in RPM when you do the carb heat. Why?
Because of the hot air?
Correct. So what are you doing with hot air? What's happening with the carb heat?
It's being delivered to the engine.
Correct. You are delivering hot air into the engine. So you have hot air and you get a decrease in RPMs. Why does that happen?
I put that the hot air is less dense than it is.
Correct. It's less dense. The hot air is less dense. So when you have less dense air, aka hotter air, the engine performance goes down, it decreases. Because remember, for any given volume of hot air and any given volume of cooler air, I have less air molecules with the hot air than I do with the cooler air. So I'm giving less air to the engine. Engine needs air to operate. So less air means that you're going to get a decrease in engine performance. If you're flying in hotter weather, you get a decrease in lift from the wings, decrease in thrust from the propeller. I had a bonus question that I was going to ask you. Hot air, carb heat. When do you need carb heat? When you're actually flying.
When there's icing conditions.
Icing conditions. What else? When do you put carb heat on, other than icing conditions? You probably do it every time you fly, during a certain phase.
When you're landing. Or
Yeah.
Descending.
Exactly, yeah. When you're descending, when you're landing, anytime you decrease the RPMs. So in like the 150, for example, and in a 172, that's carbureted. So any carbureted plane, for the most part, for Cessna, I'm not going to say Piper because Piper has its own thing. Anytime you're outside of the green arc with the RPMs, you should have the carb heat on, and you should do the carb heat on first and then decrease the RPM. Because now, even it might not seem like it, but anytime you go outside the green arc or when you're in a descent, the engine gets cooled rapidly. Engine starts cooling down, so you put the carb heat on so it doesn't cool down so much that you start developing icing in the carburetor. Icing could happen in 90-degree weather if it's humid enough. Because the air going through the carburetor, so the carburetor is kind of shaped like this, a very simplified version of it. So once the fuel air mixture is going through this narrow passage, it starts to speed up, and simultaneously you get a drop in temperature, and it can decrease temperature as much as 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So even though it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, you decrease it by 70, now you're at below freezing level. So you can still get ice on a hot day if it's humid enough and there's enough water in the air. So you have the carb heat on anytime you're descending, anytime you're in icing conditions, anytime the temperature dew point is kind of getting close, you have the carb heat on. My bonus question was, this is very much like, this is a more advanced correlation question, but I want you to marinate with it. So when you have the carb heat on, is your mixture leaner or richer? If you just leave it where it is. The mixture knob controls the fuel going into the cylinders or into the engine. So you have the carb heat on. Would that make your mixture more rich or more lean?
More lean.
I'm gonna guide you through the thought process. So you have the carb heat on. You have hot air going into the engine. Hot air is less dense. You have less air in the engine, but the same amount of fuel going in. Does that make it richer or leaner? Take a guess.
Leaner.
Say leaner. Why do you think leaner?
Because the hot air is less dense, and then like the fuel isn't affected. So like,
Correct.
I'm confused about that. But if it's less dense going in, I feel like it'd be leaner.
So it's less dense going in.
But that's so right on me.
So it is, you're right, it is less dense going in.
Mhm.
The air is less dense. The mixture knob's controlling the fuel, which we have not adjusted. So you had the mixture set for the RPMs that you were at before you had the carb heat on. So you were at a higher RPM. Now you're at a lower RPM because the carb heat makes the RPMs lower. So is that richer or leaner? Leaner is less fuel, richer is more fuel.
Richer.
Richer. Because now you have less air but more fuel. So more fuel means it's richer now. So if you're going to operate for a long period of time with the carb heat on, you should lean your mixture as well. Because the whole point of the mixture and the fuel-air mixture, we're trying to balance it out. So the rule of thumb is whenever the density altitude is above 3,000 feet, or if you're just flying above 3,000 feet, you should start leaning the mixture back. There's two ways of doing it. There's best power and there's best fuel economy. Most POHs are set up to where they're giving you fuel performance and calculations based on best power. Best fuel economy means that you're burning the least amount of fuel for like a given, I don't know if it's a given distance or a given time, so don't quote me on that, but it's for fuel efficiency. Not for performance, but for fuel efficiency. And then best power is, you want to get there faster? Okay, lean for best power. You're going to get a little increase in RPM. If you're leaning for best mixture, what you're going to do, let's say above 3,000 feet, is you're going to slowly pull out, you're going to set your RPMs, stabilize all that. You're going to slowly pull out the mixture, and I mean like slow, don't just jam it out. Now you have a problem. So slowly pull it out until you see a little increase in RPM. And it could literally just be like 50 RPM increase. Cool, that's best power. You've just leaned it to where the engine's now operating more efficiently because it has the perfect amount of fuel in theory for the less dense air up higher. Because as you go higher, the air is less dense. So not only does heat make a difference, but also altitude. So if you're in less dense air, maybe you're flying on a hot day, or you're just flying up high, you know that you have less air going into the engine, but you still have the same amount of fuel that's just like gushing in there. That could cause an issue, because eventually that fuel could prevent the spark plugs from combusting. If you don't have combustion, that's one of the 4 strokes of the piston. So if you don't have combustion, you don't get power. You don't get power in the engine, what happens? It fails. You get an engine failure because your mixture was too rich. So you can lean it for best power, that's usually what I do. And then that way when you read like the charts in the POH for fuel burn, like gallons per hour, you'll be able to know how much. It'll say like at this RPM setting, at this altitude, if you're leaned properly, this is how much fuel you're gonna burn per hour. And you can go through different RPMs. It's like, well, I'm gonna operate at 2,300 RPM. I'm gonna operate at 2,400 RPM. It'll be like, okay, at 2,400 RPM, you're gonna burn, I don't know, 5.5 gallons. At 2,300 RPM, you're gonna burn 5.2 gallons per hour. Just things like that. I would round up to 6. So either way, that's how I calculate it. Yes.
Could you define RPMs?
Wow, why am I blanking? I think it's rotations per minute. Or, what's the other word?
Like revolution.
Revolutions, that's what it is. Revolutions per minute. Your car has a tachometer as well, if you've ever noticed. Probably goes up a lot higher than a plane RPM. Like, I don't know, when I'm on the freeway, I feel like it's at 4,000 or 5,000 RPM or something. So you have a tachometer in your car. Weather. Okay, so you're still at McClellan. You listen to the AWOS to ensure that the weather is within your limitations as a private pilot. So you're taking off out of McClellan, what weather do you need to be able to take off legally? This is one of those questions where it's 2 questions in one.
Equilibrium.
That is kind of like why we have like this weather and wind. Do you know what I'm asking? What 2 questions I'm asking with this question?
What airspace McClellan is and then what the weather minimums for that is.
There you go. Now you've got some guidance. I'm asking you about airspace and I'm asking you about weather minimums.
I looked it up and it said it's a class C, a class E, and I don't know what that means, but
Okay, answered one of those questions.
class E.
Okay, that's Class Echo. Class Echo is signified by what symbol on the VFR sectional chart? Remember? Call it a JMCC, and it's that dashed magenta line. That is a Class Echo. Starting from where? Where would you find that information? There's a book by McKenna that would probably help. Or you could actually just also look at the VFR sectional chart legend.
Does it start in Sacramento? Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking at what altitude echo starts. And I want to commend you for asking me a clarifying question. You can totally do that. If you're not sure what the examiner's asking, ask them, are you asking me, like, is it starting in Sacramento, or what are you asking me with that? You can totally do that.
Is it below 10,000?
It's definitely below 10,000. Dash magenta line. Herein lies the answer. Surface? Correct. Starts at the surface. Okay, so now you know it's an echo starting from the surface. What's the other question I'm asking you? What airspace are you in? And you said it.
The weather.
Yeah,
Minimums.
and the weather minimums. You solved half of the problem. It's an echo airspace.
So
Is
now,
that like, sorry,
No, go ahead.
the 5 miles of like visibility? Or...
That is in that list, but it's not for this one.
Okay.
is it 3152?
Correct. 3152, what does that mean?
3 section miles of visibility,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think it's 1,000 above,
Mm-hmm.
500 horizontal, and then 2,000 below, or the opposite of those last two. Okay.
500, so 3 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above a cloud, 500 feet below a cloud, 2,000 feet horizontal. 3 152s when you're in a class echo below 10,000 feet. Since you brought it up, what is it above 10,000 feet?
That's the 5, right?
That's the 5. That is the 5111. What does that mean?
1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and then it's like the 1 square mile, right?
Section mile.
It's that
Yeah.
mile.
1 mile in between. So it goes from 2,000 feet to 1 whole mile. So that's a cloud, I need to be a mile away from it. Above 10,000 feet. Why, when you get up higher, do the minimums expand? Why do you need more up higher?
There's less traffic, maybe.
So you need more space now when you're up higher. Think about it. Who's up there above 10,000 feet?
The big ones.
The big ones, the big guys, fast planes, jets, airliners, whomever. Fast planes get up to 10,000 feet and above. So you need more reaction time. You need more separation from the clouds in case one of them decides to pop through a cloud and you're above it and you're like, oh my God, where did you come from? Now you at least have 1,000 feet to maneuver out of the way. All right, now what weather do you need to get into Monterey? Because remember, you are limited to VFR only. I'm asking you the same 2 questions.
It's a class Charlie.
I think it's a class Charlie. Yeah, is it a solid line? Yes. It is a class Charlie.
For McLennan?
For Monterey.
Monroe.
So it's a class Charlie.
You need an ADS-B, emergency transponder, and 2-way communication.
correct. That's the equipment that you need. What about the weather? There's that chart. It's that solid magenta line. There's two shelves. There's the outer shelf and the inner shelf. It even says it right here too. It says Monterey, Class C, Class Charlie. So ADS-B, Mode C transponder, two-way communication. You need all of that to get in. And you also need certain weather minimums to get in. VFR.
3152 again.
Correct. 3152, once more. 3 miles, 1,000 feet above, 500 below, 2,000 feet in between. I'm just curious what this is. Huh. There's high-speed aerobatic demonstrations at the California International Air Show. So this is a TFR, a temporary flight restriction. That's included in our other airspace. So basically, they're saying, hey, stay out of here, because we're having an air show. So obviously, you don't want to be flying around Salinas. That's the airport. And it doesn't look like you can even go in at all. Let's see.
Yeah,
This
this is the Tricon building yesterday.
Oh,
I
how
did
was
a tour.
that?
They were complaining about that air show because
Oh,
they had
funny.
to divert everybody around it.
Yeah,
That's why I was like, oh,
that makes sense.
Salinas, that was like.
See,
But
we're
it was
all
really cool.
human. We're all human. Air traffic controllers have their pet peeves too. That's so cool. I'm glad you went. So yeah, it looks like just due to high-speed aerobatic demonstrations, all aircraft operations are prohibited. So there's not even like, oh, you can go in if you're talking to someone, you just can't go in. And it's active from September 28th at 11 a.m. Is that today? Yep, that's today. Till 4:30 p.m. and it's from the surface up to 16,000 feet MSL. So if you're at 17,000 feet, you're fine. You're outside of it. You can fly over it. But anywhere in between, you cannot. My assumption of why it's so high is because they usually have like skydivers parachuting out, so we go apply for that. Northern California TRACON is the FAA coordination facility, CDM. So there's a lot of really random shorthand that you'll see like in NOTAMs, in TFRs, in weather. And I don't know why at this point with technology we can't just write the whole word, but as you start reading it, you kind of start getting used to what the language is, but it does take time. So Northern California TRACON, and there's their telephone if you want to call and complain, but they really can't do anything for you. Anything else on that? Yeah. You'll have TFRs over sporting events, like over stadiums. If there's like a baseball game or a football game, happens a lot in the Bay Area because that's where all the sports are. You'll have VIP TFRs for when the president is in town. And what they usually do, which is so inconvenient, they obviously don't want you to know exactly what airport the president's going to. So if let's say they're going to SFO, they will put a TFR over SFO, they'll put one over Oakland, they'll put one over San Jose, they'll put one over Hayward to throw you off. But now there's a whole bunch of TFRs everywhere and you can't do anything. Because they're just like, oh, where are they going? We don't know, because, for safety, of course. But man, it's very inconvenient if you're trying to fly over there. And those TFRs are, I don't know off the top of my head how long or how big they make them. I want to say they're like 60 nautical miles across. So, like for example, if there's a TFR in SFO, I think the very edge of it covers Petaluma Airport. And there's a flight school out of there. And I actually live in Petaluma, for those that don't know. So anyone who's flying or flight training out of Petaluma can't fly that day because they can't even take off. And it's literally like the very edge of it. So, but yeah, so you'll see that sometimes. VIP TFRs, air show TFRs, sports TFRs. All right, prognostic charts. So you're kind of doing your weather briefing right now, and you see this symbol. Let's pretend it's over California. What does it mean? Why do you care?
It's like fronts, right?
Correct. What kind of front?
Stationary?
It is a stationary front. What does that mean?
anchor for a few days, but I don't really.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a mix of two fronts. You have two fronts, neither one's winning. Because usually when you get a front, it's because one air mass is taking over the other. What kind of front is it called when you have a front overtaking the other front? Like it's probably a cold front overtaking a warm front. Occluded front. So a lot of the time you'll see stationary fronts turn into occluded fronts because usually the cold front wins because it moves faster than the warm front. In this case, neither one's winning. So it's probably a weak, slow-moving cold front and a warm front. Or it's a strong warm front and like a relatively weak cold front. But I digress. It's a slow-moving cold front and a warm front. Neither one's winning. So you kind of get a combination of weather from the warm and from the cold front. So the warm front part is there's a lot of moisture in the air. Because warmer air is usually moist. And then the cold front is like where you get the rain and you kind of get some instability. The difference is with the stationary front, it's not going to be like showery precipitation. It's not going to be rain that lasts for 15 minutes and then it's done. And then like 30 minutes later, it goes on for 20 minutes, like where it's random. It's just probably going to be like a nice light drizzle for like 3 days. Just going to hang out until it dissipates. Or it might get worse because it becomes an occluded front and then the cold front overtook the warm front and then it becomes like thunderstorms and stuff like that. Alright, so you're going from McClellan to Monterey. So based on the VFR sectional chart and the information presented to you, what altitude would you choose to make this trip? And I'm going to open full flight. So what are some factors that would influence your decision of altitude?
Near Monterey, there's hang gliders and parachutes.
There's hang gliders and parachutes, absolutely. All sorts of sightseeing activities for people. What else are you going to encounter on your way to Monterey? I know some of you you haven't really looked at flight or looked at sectional charts yet, so this is completely new to you, so I understand that. Just from your knowledge of California, even if you're just driving, if you're driving from here to Monterey or just kind of anywhere along the coast.
Traffic?
There is traffic, other airplane traffic for sure. When you're driving, so what's the kind of unique thing about California? In Sacramento, we're in a valley, right?
Ocean.
Yeah, you have the ocean. What else do you have on either side of Sacramento? You have mountains. So when you're going to Monterey, you're going to encounter those coastal mountains. So terrain. So probably one of the number one factor when you're selecting your altitude to fly at. You want to make sure you clear terrain. Another consideration that I'm just going to throw at you is the weather up at different altitudes. Specifically the wind. So you might have a headwind at 4,500 feet, but at 6,500 feet, winds are calm. So maybe you go to 6,500 feet so that you don't have to deal with the headwind, causing your trip to take longer, causing your plane to burn more fuel. Or maybe it's bumpy at one altitude when you're already flying and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know it was gonna be this bumpy. Let's try higher. Maybe I'll go higher. So just because you selected an altitude doesn't mean you necessarily have to stay at that altitude, unless you're on a flight following and ATC gave you an altitude restriction. But even so, if they tell you, stay at, maintain 4,500, if it's not an emergency, you can request higher. And you can say, 613, NorCal approach, 61329, we're requesting higher due to turbulence at this altitude. They'll be like, approve as requested, or 329er climb, maintain 6,500. I maintain 6,500. Thank you, 329er. Try it at 6,500. And then they might check in with you and be like, 329er, how's the ride? And then you could be like, much smoother, thank you, 329er. You know, things like that. Or if it's worse, it's like, it's even worse. Can I go back down? Okay, you can do that too. And they'll probably ask you for what's called a pilot report, and they'll be like, hey, can you tell us how the turbulence is? And you would say like, it's light turbulence. If it's uncomfortable, it's probably closer to moderate turbulence. So you can be like, moderate turbulence at 4,500, but 6,500 is smooth. If it's just occasional turbulence, like once in a while you have a bump, like a big bump, you could say like moderate chop. Chop is occasional, turbulence is like ongoing. If it's severe or extreme, you're not flying that day, so we're not even gonna put that situation up. So terrain, weather, just general obstacle clearance.
So would you say this is back to like the pave, like
Yeah.
environmental factors?
For sure, your environmental factors is like, okay, well, I'm in the valley at Sacramento, I never really have an issue, but now I'm gonna fly up the coastal mountains and I need to look at, you know, what are my high elevation figures, which are these numbers right here. I wanna emphasize that just because you have this number along your route, that does not mean that that obstacle is along your route. It just means that there's an obstacle that you need to be at 4,800 feet to avoid within this quadrant. Over here, there's an obstacle that's 4,200 feet in this quadrant. That doesn't mean it's on your route. It just means somewhere it's in here. And it happens to be this one right here, I believe. Because it's, you can tell because it's slightly bigger. Wow, where'd it go? I messed it up. Right there. Okay, let me see. There it is. It's Mount Hamilton, 4,400 feet. Why is it 48 instead of 44? I'm going to tell you. Because if it's 4,400 feet, they round up or they just add another 100 feet. So even though it's 4,400, they're adding it up to 4,500. And then they add 300 on top of that. So they add 100 plus 300 to get 4,800. That way you're going to be well clear of it. Because you're going to be like, oh, 4,800, I need to at least be at 5,500 or 6,500 to be safe. So you're going to be well clear of the obstacle. So that's why you get those numbers. And it's right there, so it's like, yeah, it is pretty close to your route, so you could totally factor it in, or you could change your route to just go around it to where you don't have to go that high. I will tell you though, personal experience, I usually do. Let's see. So another kind of question and another factor for your altitude is, did you know that if you're going between 0 degrees, like in terms of direction, from 0/360 degrees down to 179 degrees, it needs to be odds plus 500 above a certain altitude. Do you know when that regulation comes into play?
3,000?
Yes. Anytime you're above 3,000, there's a regulation, 91-119. Write it down, tab it, 91-119, called minimum safe altitudes. Once you're above 3,000 feet, from 0 degrees to 179 degrees, they want you at an odd altitude plus 500. So that means you're either at 3,500, 5,500, 7,500, so on and so forth. From 180 to 359, so like southwest, west, northwest, it's evens plus 500. So you're either at 4.5, 6.5, 8.5. And they do that for separation.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the yellow and then what's like the borders?
So the yellow means that that's like a populated area, so it's like a city or a town.
Okay.
And it's that bright yellow because back in the day when you're all like on paper charts, we use headlamps and we have it on red light because the white light gets rid of it, destroys your night vision. So you can't see that well at night if you get blinded by a white light. So we use red lights because it doesn't affect your night vision. But when you're looking at the paper chart with a red light, it's super hard to see anything that's red. And so they put it in a bright yellow so you can see it at night. And then the borders, like which one? Like this one?
Like the super, I don't even know what you call it. No, like it's kind of like
fake one.
The
faded,
blue?
yeah. The thick faded ones.
Like the purple ones.
Oh, these?
Yeah.
So that is an indication of airspace. So anything, so they're called the magenta fuzzy lines. So anything on the fuzzy side, so like the faded side, what airspace is it? It's an airspace, but which one? Look at a VFR sectional chart legend. There's one right there. You can Google it. Echo? It is an echo, starting at what altitude?
700 feet?
Yeah, it's an echo starting at 700 feet. So everything on the fuzzy side is an echo airport starting at 700 feet, except for like these guys right here, because those were deltas. Except for the Charlie, but everything else, like Rancho Murrieta is an echo until starting at 700 feet. Below that, it's a Gulf. So, again, even if you're flying northeast, east, southeast, it's odd plus 500. If it's southwest, west, and northwest, it's evens plus 500. And I don't know why, but my CFI taught me that oddballs fly east. And that's just how I remember it. Oddballs fly east. So it's odd plus 500, you're going east. So right now, I'd say it's heading more towards the southwest side. And one thing you can do, I don't know if I can do it on the computer, but if you click on it, maybe not. So at least on the phone and on the iPad, if you click on that blue line, like on your route, it'll tell you the magnetic direction that you're heading. And then you can be like, okay, I'm going like southwest, so I'll do even plus 500. Although I'm also going to say that it's not necessarily your magnetic heading that you're on, it's your track across the ground that matters. Because there could be a wind coming at you from, like, let's say this side. So you're turning the plane into the direction of, and you don't even know it, but you just notice when you're flying, like you're kind of being pushed off. You're looking at your, like, let's say you're looking at your GPS, you're like, I cannot maintain my course. So you keep pointing the nose this way. So you're like, well, now I'm heading southeast, so I should be 5-5. But your track across the ground's still going southwest. You're just crabbing for wind correction. So you're flying per good, you're flying like this. ATC can see your ground track. That's what they care about. So your ground track could be 185, but your heading could be 179, or yeah, 179. You think you should be at 5-5, ATC wants you at 6-5 or 4-5. And they'll tell you that too. They'll be like, they'll be subtle about it. They'll be like, 329, what altitude you at? They'll be like, 5,500. You're just like, because I am correct. And they'll be like, yeah, looks based on your course, you should be at 4-5 or 6-5. That's, you know, that's just their way of being like, either climb or descend, but you need to be at the correct altitude. Because somebody coming from here might be at 5-5, and now you're at 5-5 going the opposite direction. They need that separation. So it's your ground track that they care about. Which sometimes is just hard to tell. You might not know that you're doing it, and it's, you know, it's innocent enough, it's not a big deal. ATC will correct you, they need to. So considerations for altitude would be weather, terrain, and 91-119. So your direction of flight. You're a private pilot. You tell your friend that you're on your way to the airport because you want to go do some pattern work. Your friend asks if instead of flying the pattern, can you drop them off over at Willows Airport because they're meeting their parents for lunch. They'll pay half of the operating costs, so like the fuel and the rental. Can you do that? Why not?
Because when you're a private pilot, you can't take any money coming in. Only commercial pilots can get paid.
Only commercial pilots can get paid, but you are paying half. You're paying half, they're paying half. You're allowed to pay pro rata, right?
You weren't gonna go there originally.
Mhm.
Correct. Yes, correct. So there's the pro rata thing. Can't pay less than the pro rata share, which just means you got to split it evenly between you and the other person, you and the 2 other people, whatever. But this is not a regulation, it's a case law. It's called common purpose. You have to have already been going there. And then your friend's like, oh, hey, can I tag along? Yeah, that's fine. And they'll pay half, that's fine. You were gonna go there with or without them. But if you're gonna go fly and do something else, and they're like, hey, let me change your plans for you, and I'll pay half the cost. Now, how the FAA sees it is like, well, now you're getting more hours, which counts as compensation, and you're only paying half the cost. So you're almost getting paid to get more hours than what you were planning on.
So what if it's on the way?
Still
And
can't
it's
do
like
it.
a stop.
Still can't do it. Has to be whatever your destination was that you chose. So like if you were going to Monterey and they had a business meeting or they're meeting someone at Salinas, or they're going to the air show at Salinas, you were going to Monterey, you weren't going to Salinas. So you still can't do it.
You can still take them, but just not accept money if they're.
Yes, you can do it for free, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. You can do it for free. So, if you're comfortable with that, do it for free. Or I'd be like, I'm going to Monterey, I can take you to Monterey, you can Uber to Salinas.
But they can pay half, right?
They can still pay half. If they're going to Monterey with you and you were already going to Monterey, that's totally fine. The pilot has to choose the destination. So they can go with you and Uber to Salinas.
I have a question about
Yeah.
that. So I think I talked a few weeks ago about that woman I was flying with who had her own Cessna 172. She keeps trying to get me to do the flight plan, and now that you mentioned that, I don't know if that's illegal for her to just, because she's like, oh, make a plan of flight, for flight, and send it to me, and then I'm like,
Yeah, so technically, it can't really be your flight plan because, you're the student and she would be a passenger. She's not a CFI, right?
right, no,
Yeah.
no.
So, technically it has to be like her thing.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
God, I've been accidentally doing that because I've been too busy to do them myself.
Right.
So I've been like, you pick, and then
Mm-hmm.
now I have a reason to not do it.
Yeah, you can just be like, it's
Great.
and it's like, is anyone gonna know? Probably not. But it's the spirit of the law, and it's also, there's always a risk where it's like someone's auditing your logbook.
Right, and there's a paper trail now because she always asks me in text message, and I'm like, oh, if someone ever was in my
Exactly.
phone and looking at that, they'd know.
Yeah, you just have to be paranoid, and I think some people are like, well, no one's gonna know, and it's like, yeah, but things slip.
Right.
That whole case law with the common purpose thing, it's because someone in an FBO nearby overheard the pilot talking to their friend about it, and they tattled on him. They reported them to the FAA, and then it became a court case, and now we have that case law. So you just never know who's around and who's listening. So you just have to be more paranoid, because you just never know. So things like that happen. Yeah, this person was just like, yeah, I can take you, and we can pay the cost, we can split the cost, that's totally fine. Because pro rata, that's what it says in the regulation. It doesn't say it has to be common purpose, but someone reported them because they kind of put it together. They're like, hey, that private pilot's being compensated for the flight, and they're getting more hours for it, but they're not paying as much. So that counts as compensation according to the FAA. And the FAA was like, hey, yeah, you're right. You can't do that. You're flying for hire now. So. Yeah, there's another situation where, and the general public doesn't know this, they don't understand. If they hear private pilot, they think you're flying private jets, So, like, we have people sometimes asking us, like, I've been asked before, hey, I need to fly from here to Oregon. Can I pay you as a flight instructor to provide me instruction on the way to Oregon, and then you drop me off, and then you fly back to your flight school? I'll pay for the flight. I can't do that. As an instructor, I have to provide them instruction on the way there and on the way back, in order for it to be okay for them to cover the plane cost and pay me. Because technically what's happening is I'm transporting them from A to B, and now I'm transporting a person. Am I providing flight instruction on the way there? Sure, but not on the way back. And I'm not paying for the flight on the way back. So I'm being compensated with the hours. And it's just people just don't know. They're not asking that to be vindictive or like malicious or any way, but then you tell them that rule and they're like, well, that's dumb. And I'm like, I know. Like, yeah, I agree. But it's what it is what it is. Alright, so every time you're getting ready for a check ride, doesn't matter if it's your private pilot, your instrument, your commercial, every single time you're flying in an airplane, examiner wants to see the maintenance logs. Because most of the time, this examiner may or may not, they might not have flown with you before, they may have never been in this specific airplane before. They need to make sure that this plane is safe and legal. What inspections are they expecting to see, and how frequently do they need to be performed? Let's say it's for your private pilot check, right?
The 100 hours.
The 100 hour. Yes, and so like I said early on, there's 3 logbooks. Engine, airframe, propeller. Each one of those gets 100 hour. It's generally done at the same time. There's only been once where I've seen it done at different times, which is so silly. But it's at the same time. Is it Hobbs time or tack time? We went over this very briefly, so it's okay if you don't remember.
For the engine?
For maintenance in general, is it Hobbs or tack?
Hobbs.
I appreciate that you said it confidently though. It's the tack time.
Okay.
So the tachometer time, that's the time on the engine, and that's what we use for maintenance. Hobbs we use for invoicing, and just for your logbook hours. So they're expecting to see the 100 hour. What else are they expecting to see?
With the EV8 checklist?
Correct. Yes. Which is
The annual?
annual and 100 hour.
The VOR?
The VOR check, how often?
30 days?
And is it required for private pilot?
No.
Correct. Instrument only, but yes. Inspections, which includes the 100 hour. There's also one other thing that they always do. There's the 100 hour and the annual. It's another type of inspection. Remember, this one's kind of like a car recall.
Airworthiness directives?
Airworthiness directives. So just as a reminder, airworthiness directives are kind of like a recall on a car. They find certain things on specific models of like the 150, for example. We're a 150J, so 150J model has certain things that just happen to be going wrong on all the models. Whether it's the seat tracks get worn really easily, and then there's a compliance time, so it'll be like, hey, check the seat tracks every 100 hour. And then in the 100 hour, they'll include AD, the number of the AD complied with, or something, or checked seat tracks per AD, whatever the number was. So yes, airworthiness directives. What's the other A?
Altimeter.
Which one?
Altimeter.
Yeah, the altimeter / pedostatic system. How often?
24 calendar months.
Every 24 calendar months. Is that required for private pilot?
No.
Correct. Instrument only, but still, good for you to know. What's the T?
Transponder?
Transponder, how often?
24?
Mm-hmm. Private pilot?
Yes.
Correct. What's the E?
ELT?
ELT. How often?
12 calendar months.
Correct. Or, do you remember, there's other things, there's other instances when you would check the ELT?
1 hour of cumulative use and then half the battery life.
Correct. Beautiful. Yes, that's what they're gonna check. For private pilot, yeah, they don't need the VOR check. They don't need the altimeter pedostatic system check. But just so you know, we do it anyway for the 150 because we do have a couple of instrument students. So it'll be in there, and you might as well just show it to them. It also kind of just looks good, and you could be like, I know this isn't required, but we also have the altimeter pedostatic system checked last year, so that's also been complied with. But yeah, they're gonna look for the 100 hour and the annual in each logbook, airframe, propeller, and engine. They're gonna look for the airworthiness directive list, make sure that's been complied with. They're gonna look for, I said annual 100 hour ADs. Make sure the transponder has been checked and tested within the past 24 calendar months. Make sure the ELT is up to date. They want to make sure that this plane's safe because they're also kind of trusting you with their life, and they may or may not have ever been in this airplane before. So, there is a little bit of nervousness that every examiner kind of goes through too, because they're like, here I am, flying with someone who knows if they're safe. They're the final line of defense. So you have your CFI, you have your stage check pilots to, that help make sure your CFI is doing everything. The examiner is the last one. So yeah, they're not nervous too. All right, if you see these conditions outside, would you believe the atmosphere to be relatively stable for your flight? Why or why not? Go outside, the windsock is like sticking straight out. See some cumulus clouds. We're almost there.
It could be wind shear.
Yeah, if you're wind shear. So do we think that's stable?
No.
Correct. It looks very unstable outside. So you have a very windy day, and just so you know, I believe, so each section of the windsock means a certain amount of wind. I want to say when it's fully straight out, that means that the wind's 15 knots or greater. So that's a pretty windy day. Then you got these tall clouds, clouds with extensive vertical development.
Is that what, those are the clouds that cause turbulence?
Yes, those are cumulus clouds. Lots of turbulence, lots of instability. If there's enough moisture in the air, they become cumulonimbus clouds, which means rain and thunderstorms. So yeah, you see the windsock is just out there like that. You see those kind of clouds in the sky, you might want to consider your flight. If they're high enough, might not be that big of a deal, but even when they're high, there's still an instability down lower. You'll get really good visibility, which is nice because everything's unstable and everything has the ability to lift now. So pollution and smog is all lifting up and clearing, and you can see for miles, and it's really nice to fly, but it could be super bumpy. So depending on your comfort level, you may or may not go. That being said, you know, there's like a certain level, and it depends on who your CFI is, how comfortable they are. But there's days where, like, obviously you wouldn't go by yourself, but if you're doing a flight lesson with your CFI, and yeah, you notice it's bumpy, but you see, like, you know, other students are going out, and your CFI is like, hey, let's go. Part of it is, like, to give you the experience of, like, flying on a bumpy day to where you can figure out, you know, I could expand my minimums a little bit in a safe way. And like, this is I'm trying to be very fragile about it, because that doesn't mean I want you to go out and fly in shit weather just to get the experience. I want you to do it in a safe way with your CFI. If your CFI is uncomfortable, then no, don't go. But if your CFI is like, this will be a good experience for you, there should, you know, hopefully you trust them and they've earned that trust to where, like, yeah, you're gonna go, it's gonna be bumpy, it's gonna be a little uncomfortable, but you also get that good experience of flying in different weather. And we're gonna have more days like that coming soon. So, you know, just because it's super windy out and you see those clouds, it doesn't mean you can't go. Your CFI is probably gonna ask you, like, hey, are we flying today? And you can be like, well, if it was just me, I wouldn't go. And if they're in, you know, the mood and they're feeling good and they're feeling safe enough to do it, they might be like, okay, great, yes, don't go if you were by yourself, but let's keep the lesson and let's go up so you can get some crosswind landing experience, crosswind takeoff experience, some experience flying in light to moderate turbulence, as long as they've deemed it safe. So again, very fragile. I'm trying to be very fragile with that statement. I'm not saying just go. I'm you know, take a calculated risk to expand your experience a little bit more in a controlled environment. So with the CFI. If the first time you're seeing this, you're by yourself as a private pilot, no, don't go. Get a CFI to go with, that's comfortable. But especially like if you start doing your instrument rating, getting your instrument rating, it gets really hard to set personal minimums because now you can fly in clouds. But it's a calculated risk, but now there's like less guidance on what your personal minimum should be. So that's, again, talk to your CFI about it. All right, we're gonna do math. I should have put this in the front because I know you're all tired now. But let's try it. So I want you to calculate the pressure altitude at McClellan Airport with this current altimeter setting. Field elevation is 77 feet. And from there, I want you to get the density altitude with this information. Let me know if you're missing any information. I think I gave it to you, but. Start with the pressure altitude formula, then move on to the density altitude formula. Does sport flight tell you the density altitude? Yes. But your examiner could totally be like, well, here's the situation. Do the calculation for me.
For the pressure altitude, I got a negative number. Is that-
Yep.
Okay,
Makes sense.
And the field elevation is 7,000.
It's 77 feet. Yeah. Just above sea level.
Is using an E6B calculator cheating?
No.
Okay.
I see if I maybe use like a wheel. He was like, you're not allowed to use a calculator. I was like, oh my god. And like, so I had a student that got one, and like I'd never really used one. Oh my god, they're so nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I have one. I have never gone back. So I got one on my phone too.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, I did the calculator. But cool. Yeah. I used to go to an academy that used to have us do this every single flight, so I'd have to get there like 30 minutes early just to do
Yeah.
all of the weight and balance and all of the
Mhm.
weather. Just, you know, I'm not doing that by hand. I have to do
Yeah, at least you
calculator.
got, it's good you got practice doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then for sure, it's like, you learn how to do it by hand now, and then we know once you guys are private pilots and you're moving on, we know you're gonna use ForeFlight, we know you're gonna use calculators and apps and such. It's just kind of like a rite of passage kind of thing, understanding where everything's kind of coming from. Does everybody have pressure altitude? What did we get?
I got negative 123.
Okay.
Negative 106.
Okay. So we're all in the ballpark. Okay. Yeah, it's negative. Because it's 2992 minus 3012, right? And then you times it by 1,000, that's the field elevation. Okay, what's the density altitude? So now you take your pressure altitude, moving on with the next formula. And I know you guys are probably looking at like, what does ISA mean?
Yeah.
So International Standard atmosphere or something like that. So we're talking about what standard temperature is at sea level essentially, because McClellan's 77 feet fill elevation, so it's pretty much sea level. Standard temperature at sea level on a normal day is 15 degrees Celsius. That decreases 2 degrees Celsius every 1,000 feet. So the higher you go, the colder it gets. So we're gonna say we're at sea level, so you can use 15.
Could you show how you would do the density altitude? Could you walk us through that?
Yeah.
I was confused on that.
Okay. Okay, what's the formula? It's the, hold on, let me write what I know. So it's dA equals the pressure altitude, and is it plus the 120?
Yeah.
Times OAT minus ISA. Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I know it's like 2 or whatever. Okay, so I'll just use negative 123 plus 120 times, what's 32 minus 15? Is it 17? Somebody help me.
Yeah.
Okay. 17. Alright, so then you got negative 123 plus, what's 120 times 17? You can use a calculator.
123.
120, or 120 times 17.
2040.
2040. Alright, what's negative 123 plus 2040? Otherwise 2040 minus 123.
1917.
1917.
1917.
Alright, so the density altitude is 1917. What does that mean? Who cares? Density altitude is 1917 at a sea level airport.
I think that's what the plane feels like it's at.
Correct. Plane feels like it's at almost 2,000 feet. How does that affect your performance? So on the ground, the airplane's on the ground at an elevation of 77 feet. The plane thinks it's at 2,000 feet, almost. What happens to the air when you go higher?
Gets colder.
It does get colder. What else? How else does it change?
Gets denser. Or
Less dense.
It's less dense. Okay, 2,000 feet, not a huge deal. But it is a factor, so plane thinks it's higher than it is. The air is gonna have characteristics of a higher altitude. So the air is almost like it's at 2,000 feet. Engine's gonna perform as if it were at 2,000 feet, not at sea level now. There's a little bit less air molecules going into the engine, a little less air molecules going over the wing, a little less air molecules getting sliced by the propeller. So decreased engine performance, decreased lift, decreased thrust. So it's going to negatively affect the plane's performance. What does that mean? It means longer takeoff distance, longer landing distance, reduced climb rate. So you need more RPMs for any given airspeed. Because your pitot tube, all it's doing is measuring pressure going into it. So at 2,300 RPM on like a cooler day, maybe at 2,300 RPM, you're used to getting, let's say 90 knots on the indicated speed. In the 150, definitely not. It's gonna be like 80 miles per hour, but let's just say 90 knots. That same amount of air going in on a hot day, same amount of air, but less molecules for that given volume. Pitot tube doesn't change. It's the same shape, it's the same size, but there's less molecules going in it on a hotter day. So 2,300 RPM is not going to give you 90 knots anymore. Now it's going to only give you 87 knots or 85 knots. Now you need 2,400 RPM to get to 90 knots. So a more advanced question, when you're landing the airplane, how are you going to adjust your airspeed when you're landing at a higher density altitude? Your indicated airspeed. Are you going to shoot for a slower airspeed, a faster airspeed, the same airspeed?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so if you're, let's say it's a hot day, high density altitude, bad. So it's a hotter day, and you're coming in to land somewhere. I'm asking, if it's a hot day, high density altitude, how do you adjust your airspeed? Because you should be aiming for certain airspeeds when you're landing. Do those change? How do they change when it's hotter?
You might need more power to maintain the airspeed.
Yes, you're aiming for the same speed. If you're supposed to cross the threshold at 65 miles per hour or 65 knots, whatever it is, you're aiming for that same speed, but you might need more power to get there than you're used to. Maybe you could do that at 2100 RPM, and now you need 2200 RPM to maintain that speed with whatever flap setting you're at. So yeah, same indicated airspeed, but more power to get there. That's why the takeoff roll takes longer. Because you're on takeoff roll, you rotate at a certain speed, it's called rotation speed, VR. In the Cessna 150 at 60 miles per hour. Again, the pitot tube's just measuring pressure. It takes longer on the roll for the pitot tube to get the appropriate amount of pressure to indicate 60 miles per hour than it would on a cold day. It might get 60 miles per hour within 800 feet on a cold day, but maybe on a hot day, now you need 1,000 feet to get that same amount of pressure to move the gauge. Does that make sense? Your pitot tube is a pressure gauge. That's all it is. A certain amount of pressure goes in. Let's say I don't know. I'm just spitting out a number. Let's say 5 pounds of pressure goes in the pitot tube. That's going to indicate 20 knots. But that 5 pounds might take 800 feet on a cold day or 1,000 feet on a warm day. It needs that 5 pounds to indicate a certain speed, or it needs 10 pounds to indicate another certain speed. So longer takeoff, longer landing because your true airspeed's faster. The air is expanded, there's less air molecules, less drag on the plane, so you're probably going to float a little bit longer. Float a little bit longer on the landing, reduce climb gradient because again you're not getting as much thrust to get 500 feet a minute, so maybe now it's 400 feet a minute. That's the maximum you can get without stalling. 2,000 feet is not a huge deal, especially at McClellan where you have almost 11,000 feet. As we talked about a couple lessons ago though, like when you go to like Lake Tahoe, that number rises very quickly because Lake Tahoe elevation is already like 6,300 feet. So an extra 2,000 feet puts you now at 8,000 feet. And the 150 doesn't like that altitude. So that's where it gets dicey. So we get kind of spoiled here flying out of the valley where it's flat, and at McClellan specifically where it's wide and it's long. But even if you just go up to Auburn occasionally, you'll feel those effects of density altitude. That's why you should be flying at different airports with your CFI. Different terrain, different levels of turbulence, different density altitudes. Get that experience, just because if you get super comfortable and complacent at McClellan and no experience in different terrain, then you're not gonna have the experience to be like, ooh, I remember that one flight, I don't want to repeat that, so I'm not gonna fly today. You're just gonna be like, well, yeah, it's hot outside, but like I've always been fine. At McClellan, you've been fine, but somewhere up higher, if you go to like Nevada County or Auburn, which it's not that high, but the runway's a lot shorter. It's like a third, if even a third of McClellan. It's a lot, and it's narrower. And it's not flat. There's terrain. Both Auburn and Nevada County have like a slope, depending on what side you're on. I think at Auburn, if you land on 2.5, it slopes up. If you land on 7, it slopes down. So you have the slopes to take into account. Obviously you have like the width and the length. There are some runways, not many, but there are some that they call it a dog leg, where there's like a bend in the runway. Like it's not completely straight. So then you have that to take into account too. All sorts of weird places that they put runways. But I believe that is it. Here's a list of regulations that we knowingly or unknowingly went through. I can't tell you what they are off the top of my head. 61.113, that's privileges and limitations. Remember, part 61 is how you're getting your certificate. It's the regulations of the flight school. Part 61 flight school. There's part 61, there's part 141. Part 61 is how you get your certificate. Part 91 is how you lose it. Can't remember what 91.9 is. There's 91.119, minimum safe altitudes. 91.151. I believe that's your VFR fuel requirements. 155, that's your VFR weather minimums. 103, that's your Northwest craft required pre-flight actions, which we didn't totally get into, but it was mentioned. 91.203, that's I can't remember that one right now. I feel like it was maintenance related, I can't remember. 205, asymmetrical planes and flaps. 213, inoperative equipment. 91.17 was the alcohol and drugs. I'm telling you the regulations because I want you to tab them, I want you to highlight them, I want you to be familiar with the information included, because you're not going to be expected to know every single answer off the top of your head for your check ride, but you are going to be expected to know where to find it. And if you're going to go through and tab it, don't just tab it and never look at it again. You know, go through your tabs every once in a while. Have your CFI quiz you. Like, hey, what's the regulation on alcohol and drugs? 91.17, okay, find it, what's it say? Do things like that. Get familiar with your FAR aim, because there's people, you can buy FAR aims that are pre-tabbed. So if somebody already tabbed them all for you, and it looks beautiful, it looks super organized, but I've had a student go into a check ride, and no matter how many times I've told them, hey, make sure you're going through the tabs and like you're making your own notes and highlighting stuff. And he's like, yeah, for sure. Never did that, never opened it, had all the tabs. Looked great. It looked really good. He didn't know where actually to find anything though, because there's literally like 50 tabs on there. So it's more of a hindrance than helpful, because I think they include tabs on things that you don't really need to know as a private pilot. Because I think the one that he got was private and instrument. You're just doing a private pilot check ride right now, dude. You have instrument tabs on there. It's very overwhelming when you're nervous and suddenly like you can't read. So if you're gonna buy a pre-tabbed one, that's fine, but it's up to you to go through and actually understand how to find the regulations and such. And there is like a table of content page for part 91, tab that page. Because it just lists out like 91.119, minimum safe altitudes, 91.17, alcohol and drugs. Get used to like navigating that. It's very easy to get lost in that book. So use it, tab it, mark it up yourself, be very familiar with finding things in it and how to interpret stuff, because not only do you have to find it, now you have to read it and interpret it. It's written by lawyers. They talk in circles on purpose. They want to confuse you. So you need to read it yourself, ask questions with your CFI and be like, I don't understand what this means, because they always phrase things in a way where it's like thou shalt not unless. And then it's like, unless it's like section C of this regulation. Now you gotta flip over to the other regulation. Then you gotta take that information and apply it to where you were originally. So it's a lot of navigating. But that's it. And so we'll do 3 more lessons. We'll do something like this again, but it'll be based off of the next lessons. And then at the very end of the course, we do one where it's kind of like I can choose from anything and do something like this. And it's, again, group oriented. And I don't want you to, like, I had people last time that were like super nervous to show up, because I don't know, I'm not grading you. I'm not, like, this is not a pass or a fail. This is really just so you're used to hearing questions asked a certain way, and you're training for the oral part of the test. Like, you're getting comfortable asking me clarifying questions, like, are you asking me what airspace we're in? Yes. Oh, okay, we're in an echo. And then you're also, I'm trying to get you used to, like, I will ask one question. If you bring up something that's not related, I will probe you on it. So I think at one point somebody mentioned that there's an echo starting at 10,000 feet. I'm like, oh, okay, so what are those weather minimums? That's what an examiner will do. You're gonna hear this phrase all the time. It's stay in the box. Answer the question that they asked. Don't try to show off that you know other things about that topic. If it's a yes or no question, yes or no is your answer. Don't elaborate unless they ask you to. Is this legal? Yes. Okay, moving on. Or, what if you say yes, except I think in certain situations, oh, okay, what are those certain situations? You're gonna dig yourself a hole. And they will keep probing you until you reach a point to where you can't answer anymore. That's their job. They want to know how you answer the questions. If you bring up other topics, they're going to ask you about it. And they're going to ask you questions that sound like one question, but really it's like 2 or 3 questions in one. You have to go through each answer to figure out like the overall answer to the main question that they asked. And you're going to be nervous. And so some people, when they're nervous, they keep talking. So that's like where the elaborating part comes on. So the more we practice this, the more if you practice with your CFI, we can kind of be like, hey, stop talking. It was a yes or no. So don't say that. Because some people, they need practice if you're like a nervous test taker. So that's the whole point of this. I'm not trying to pass or fail you. I'm just trying to prepare you for like how the oral is going to be. Because if you have no exposure to it, it's terrifying. Honestly, the flying part's the easiest part. The oral is the hard part to get through. And it sucks if you don't pass the oral, because then you have to retake the oral, just really on the questions you missed, but then you also have to do the whole flight. So, that kind of sucks. And you will have to pay another fee for the examiner, and it's already expensive, so don't do that to yourself, and study. Independently, on your own, show up to class, participate, watch videos, resources I send you, I'm sending you for a reason. Don't just save them somewhere, actually open them and look at them. You don't have to read the whole thing, but know what information I'm sending you. Be like, oh, so this is a document based off of inoperative equipment. Okay, you know, you can skim it, that's fine. I'm not saying read the whole thing, but I'm like, okay, so this, if I need something on inoperative equipment, I know I can refer to this document. So things like that, you know, I'm not sending you stuff for fun. I'm sending you stuff because I know you're gonna use it later. Cool. Any questions? Cool. Well, nice job. I gave us like a bunch of slides, and I was like, we may or may not make it through the whole thing, but we did. So good job.